All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to break down one of the most extreme and frankly tragic revolutions of the entire 20th century, the short, brutal rule of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. Now, these guys rose to power out of the chaos of a civil war, promising to build a perfect, pure society. But what they actually delivered was a nightmare called Year Zero.
And before they took over, this is the kind of image the Khmer Rouge wanted the world to see. A disciplined, pure, homegrown movement. These young girls in their revolutionary outfits, it was all part of a carefully built image, a mask of moral strength that hid a truly violent, radical ideology.
Because behind that mask was this absolutely staggering reality. In less than 4 years, nearly 2 million Cambodians died. Just think about that. 1 in every 4 people, gone. Wiped out from overwork, starvation, disease, or just straight-up execution. It's a scale of loss that's almost impossible to wrap your head around.
So where did it all start? The date was April 17, 1975. Khmer Rouge soldiers, many of them just teenagers, march into the capital city, Phnom Penh. And one of their very first declarations was that 2,000 years of Cambodian history were officially over. A new era, Year Zero, had just begun.
And the very first act of Year Zero, the total, immediate evacuation of every single city. They told people it was to protect them from American bombs, but the reality was a brutal death march. It was designed to break the will of anyone from the cities. I mean, they literally forced patients out of their hospital beds. Thousands died on the roads.
And this just shows how total this reset was. They didn't just change the government. They tried to erase the very idea of society. Money was suddenly worthless. All the markets closed. Schools shut down. Religion banned. They were wiping the slate completely clean to start from scratch. And in place of a normal government, all power now belonged to this mysterious, invisible entity that was known only as the Angkar.
The psychology here is fascinating and really terrifying. The Angkar, which just means the organization, was deliberately faceless. The leaders, including the infamous Pol Pot, they all stayed hidden from the public. This created this atmosphere of just absolute terror and blind obedience. I mean, how do you fight back against an enemy you can't even see?
This chilling phrase was something that was told over and over to the people who'd been forced out of the cities. And it just perfectly captures the regime's thinking. The individual meant nothing. You weren't a person with hopes and a family. You were just a tool for the revolution. And you could be thrown away without a second thought.
So, to build this new world, the Angkar split the entire population into 2 groups. First, you had the base people. These were the rural peasants, and they were seen as the pure, ideal revolutionaries. And then, they were the new people. That was everyone from the cities who were considered contaminated by modern ideas and were treated as completely disposable. Now, this wasn't just random cruelty. It was all part of a grand, disastrous design called the 4-year plan. The goal? To triple rice production, basically overnight. And their method was to turn the entire country, especially the new people, into a giant slave labor army, working 12-hour days in the rice paddies that would become known as the killing fields. And this timeline just shows you the frantic, compressed life of this regime, Democratic Kampuchea, as they called themselves. It was incredibly short, but unbelievably destructive. In just under 4 years, it went from total victory to total collapse. And each phase just got more and more paranoid and violent.
Well, as you can probably guess, the 4-year plan was a catastrophic failure. Famine swept across the country. But the leadership, they couldn't possibly admit their policies were wrong. No, instead, they became absolutely convinced that the revolution was being sabotaged by traitors from within.
This paranoia kicked off a terrifying internal purge. The leaders started this frantic hunt for what they literally called evil microbes. Enemies they believed were hiding deep inside the party itself. The revolution, well, it began to eat its own.
And who were these so-called enemies? Well, the list just kept getting longer and longer. First, it was soldiers from the old government. Then, anyone with an education. Soon, it was their own military commanders and top party officials, especially anyone who'd ever had contact with Vietnam. Paranoia became the engine of the entire state. And that brings us to this number, over 15,000 people, and these were almost all dedicated party members, were arrested and sent to just one secret prison in the capital, codenamed S21. There, they were brutally tortured until they confessed to being spies, and then they were executed.
And you can hear the sheer madness of it all in Pol Pot's own words. He's basically saying the hunt for enemies will never, ever end, because in his mind, the threat is everywhere and it's constant. It was the perfect justification for endless murder.
So while the regime was busy consuming itself from the inside, it made one last fatal mistake. It decided to pick a fight with its much, much more powerful neighbor. And that conflict would bring the whole system crashing down.
You really have to zoom out and look at the geopolitics here. This was the Cold War. Cambodia, which was backed by China, became sort of a proxy, a thorn in the side of Vietnam, which was allied with the Soviet Union. And having this powerful international backer made the Khmer Rouge leadership feel dangerously untouchable.
Feeling completely invincible with China's support, the Khmer Rouge started launching these vicious raids across the border, massacring Vietnamese villagers. They were so blinded by their own ideology, they actually believed their revolutionary spirit could defeat Vietnam's huge battle-hardened army.
Well, it was a catastrophic miscalculation. On Christmas Day, 1978, the Vietnamese army had had enough, and they launched a full-scale invasion. And the Khmer Rouge army, which was so terrifying to its own unarmed people, just completely shattered. In just 2 weeks, it was all over. And just like that, after 3 years, 8 months, and 20 days, Year Zero was finally over. What was left was a completely devastated country and a deeply traumatized people trying to figure out what on earth had just happened to them.
But what happened next was truly remarkable. The second the Angkar was gone, Cambodian society just started to put itself back together. Survivors walked for hundreds of miles searching for any family they had left. Markets popped up overnight. People started praying again. Everything the revolution had tried to crush came rushing back to life almost instantly.
So what are the big takeaways here? Well, first, that a utopian vision, when it's pushed to its absolute logical extreme, can lead to one of the worst tragedies in human history. Second, the regime's own deep-seated paranoia is what caused it to self-destruct. And finally, its incredible arrogance on the world stage is what ultimately sealed its fate.
And all of this leaves us with one final haunting question. After a country has been so completely torn apart, not by some foreign invader, but by its own people, by its own leaders, how does a nation ever truly recover from that kind of trauma?